was perfect because keep in mind, I came from a professional, how should I say, milieu. In other words, I came as a performance musician. I was always hired to play something. I was never hired to say, what do you think? Or how would you do this? You know, in other words, I was hired to play in the symphony, or I was hired to play in a chamber orchestra, or I was hired to play in a hotel or something like that. And there was a chart. I'd sit down and play the chart and pick it and go home. So to me, this thing was already set, and I just walked into it, and I thought, wow, you know, this is. But for one of the first times, I was asked to play something that I wanted to play, or I said, or what would you do here, or why don't you just play something and see what you think, and we'll see if we like it. And I thought, all right, you know, let's go. You know, I mean, keep in mind, I'm 23 years old, and it was great, you know. So, so to answer your question about how did it feel to go into something that's already started, it was perfect. And as a matter of fact, as far as the rock and roll side of it, I didn't know that much about the rock and roll beats. I mean, they were ridiculously simple, but I didn't know anything about it. And so I said, well, I remember the first couple of gigs, I said, well, what do you want me to do? And he said, well, two things. He said, when we're playing the normal stuff, he said, just look at Jim Black and just imitate what he's playing. He said, and then when I point to you, just play a monster drum solo. So I said, well, man, that's great. You know, as a matter of fact, the very first gig we played, we were sitting around backstage, and he said, why don't you go out and get us started? I said, all right. So I went out and I played about 5 minutes, and everybody else started coming out. And so, but then, of course, the other side, which was fascinating to me, was the more legitimate side. I don't know how you'd say it, the written, the chamber stuff. And the fact is, Frank had written a lot of stuff that very few people were able to play at that time. There were very few conservatory-trained musicians. That was way beyond what anybody else was doing then. I guarantee you, it just wasn't going on in the pop field. Now, in the symphonic field or something like that, or maybe even jazz, maybe, I don't know. So out came all these charts that he'd wanted to hear, and I could play them, see, and I not only could play them, I loved it. I you know, let's go, more. So I just spent hour after hour after hour in the studio with them, and all the guys did at that time. I'm sure at some point you'll talk to Bunk and Don, and they'll probably tell you the same story, or just practically around the clock. You know, from that was in I'm going to say November, December '67, clear through till the spring. I think we left New York in April of '68. So that was all that time and then I got to, for some reason he wanted to change the drum parts to Ruben and the Jets, Cruising with Ruben and the Jets. And they'd already been done. And so he said, here's what I want you to play. And he told me what to play. Why he didn't do it, I don't know, because Frank had played a little bit of drums, you know. But he wanted me to play it, and I did. And so we overdubbed most all the tracks on it. I think it was a 2-album set. And years later, I think he changed my parts just from somebody to somebody else. I don't know. All I have is the old tracks the way they were. So, and they were all played on Billy Mundy's drums, because Billy Mundy had his set there, and he didn't come pick them up. I didn't realize that he had quit, and they were looking for another drummer. And I never met Billy for a year and a half after that. And, you know, and I understand he'd be talking to him. He's a great guy too.